Tonight is beautiful. I held Tegan's hand as we looked up at the stars from the back porch swing. Suddenly, the door opened and Mr. Nelson, without a word, grabbed Tegan's arm and dragged her inside. I sprang into action and ran behind them. I held onto Mr. Nelson's arm just before it came crashing down on Tegan. Mr. Nelson turned to me and snarled. He grabbed a handful of my clothing in his large hand and lifted me above the floor and threw me through the front door. Tegan screamed as Mr. Nelson came after me on the lawn.
James, please just go. I'll be okay.
Feeling defeated, I held my ribs as I hobbled to my car. Whether Mr. Nelson knew it or not, this was not the end of it. If you want to see how I dealt with Mr. Nelson for his hospitality, keep watching till the end of the video. Luckily for me, I was able to drive myself to the hospital where I called my parents and told them where I was.
What happened?
Mom and Dad rushed into the hospital room just as I was pulling my t-shirt on.
Your son will be fine,
Dr. King said.
A few bruised ribs, but in a few days he'll be okay.
Bruised ribs?
Mom gasped and looked at me wide-eyed. Someone tried to rob me on the way home, but I was able to get away. Mom hugged me tightly and cried.
Paula?
Dad looked at my reddened face.
You're suffocating the boy.
Mom removed her arms hesitantly. Dad turned to Dr. King.
Can he go home now? Yes, he's free to leave.
I thanked Mr. King, and my parents and I left the hospital. I drove with Dad, and Mom drove my car. I was happy Dad suggested I drive with him. At least for now, I got away from Mom's 20 questions scenario. As soon as I got home, I tried to call Tegan, but I only got her voicemail. I wasn't about to let Mr. Nelson ill-treat her or her younger siblings anymore. It was time someone taught that bully a lesson. Before I continue, let me start at the beginning. It all started with pizza. Pizza is my number one fast food go-to. I ordered pizza at least 4 times a week. Orlando, my normal pizza guy, would usually stick around for a slice or two before leaving. However, one afternoon, Orlando didn't show. Instead, when I opened the door, before me stood a tall, slender, long-haired brunette with the most gorgeous sapphire eyes.
That will be $24, sir.
She stared at me. I cleared my throat. Sure. I handed her the money. Where's Orlando? She shrugged.
I don't know. I just deliver pizzas.
I thanked her and closed the door. I ordered pizzas for the next 14 days just to see her. She told me that her name was Tegan. It was almost a month before I asked her if I could take her out on a date. It took another month before she said yes. Over the next few months, I found out that Tegan's mother died. She and her younger siblings, Monique and Josiah, now lived with their dad. While Tegan worked to bring in money for the household and take care of her family, her dad sat around the house watching TV. Why don't you leave? I asked her one evening while we were having dinner.
Well, I can't just leave my siblings and my father will come looking for us. I'll stay and protect them until they are of age to leave. Besides, I promised Mom on her deathbed to look out for my siblings, and I always keep my promises.
I sighed heavily. If you ever change your mind, you know I'm here for you. Tegan nodded but didn't say anything for a few seconds.
Dad wasn't always like that. He was loving when Mom was around. Dad is dealing with Mom's loss just as I am. He's just dealing with it in his own way.
And back to the present. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I knew I had to do something to help Tegan and her siblings. I mean, isn't that what boyfriends are supposed to do to make things easier? I wasn't totally truthful to Tegan about my past and why my parents and I had moved. The truth is, and it's even hard for me to admit it now, I was in a gang. My parents thought it was best for us to move when I was 15, and without the negative influences, maybe I'd be able to make something of myself. I finished school and I was in my last year of college. However, unknown to my parents, I kept in contact with a few of my past friends. The very next day, I contacted Yellows, one of the guys I kept in contact with, and I told him the situation. I told him I just needed him and a few of the guys to scare Tegan's father. I told them about the situation, and all I wanted was for them to scare the father into treating his children better. Yellows and I agreed that the scare tactic would occur the next night. My nerves were on edge the whole of the next day. I couldn't eat and I couldn't drink. I tried calling Tegan again and still no answer. I went to her workplace after class and she wasn't there. I went home that evening and sat on the sofa watching nothing in particular. It was around 10 p.m. on the late night news when a news reporter announced that a robbery had occurred at the Nelson residence. It was alleged that her father was beaten Items were stolen and Tegan was kidnapped. Kidnapped? I flew up from the sofa and immediately grabbed my phone and called Yellows.
Yo, James, what's up?
Yellows responded from the other side. What in the world did you do? Kidnap? You kidnapped her?
Wait, what? Kidnapped who?
Yellows sounded confused. Tegan! I told you to scare Mr. Nelson, not kidnap Tegan.
James, we did not kidnap Tegan. We just roughed up her old man a bit and tied him up and left.
Turn on Channel 6 News now. The phone went silent for a few seconds before Yellows responded.
James, we've been friends for a long time. I'll never do anything to hurt your girl. Something must have gone down after we left.
I'll call you back. I hung up without waiting for Yellows to respond. Had I made things worse? If Yellows and the boys didn't do it, then what happened? After a week, Tegan was still missing and the police had no leads. I felt like I was losing my mind. Then it struck me. What if it wasn't Yellows? What if Mr. Nelson did something to Tegan and lied about it? I decided that the only way to get answers was to question Monique and Josiah. I waited for them outside their middle school. When they saw me, they hesitated and Josiah held Monique's hand. Hey guys, how are you? Just wanted to check up on you, I said as they passed me. Neither Josiah nor Monique answered. I walked beside them. Do you guys know where Tegan is? Monique looked at me. She looked as though she was about to answer when Josiah said annoyed.
We don't know where she is. We need to get home.
If your dad did anything to her, you could tell me. Josiah and Monique stopped and turned to me. Just then, a police car pulled up beside us, and the police officer turned to Monique and Josiah.
Kids, is this guy bothering you?
The officer shot me a stern look.
Yes, he is. May we have a drop home, please?
The officer got out of the car.
Sure, no problem.
He opened the back door, and the kids got in. As they drove off, I noticed Monique turned in the back seat and looked at me until the car was out of sight. I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. My gut instinct told me that Monique and Josiah knew where Tegan was, but were too afraid to say. That night, I parked my car 2 blocks away from Tegan's house and walked the rest. I didn't want anyone to see my car. I wore dark clothes and a hoodie pulled over my face so I couldn't be noticed. I hid behind the bushes until I saw the last light in the house go off. I then waited another 15 minutes to make sure that everyone was asleep before I jimmied one of the windows and entered the living room. I allowed my eyes to get accustomed to the darkness since I didn't want to use a flashlight to make someone on the outside aware that I was in the house. First, I crept to Tegan's room. The scent of her filled my nostrils as soon as I entered. I missed her smile, her laughter, her kisses. I needed to get to the bottom of this quickly. I spent about 15 minutes in her room searching through her papers and cupboards, but came up barehanded. Maybe I should check the basement. If she's hidden, it has to be there, I mumbled to myself. I crept down to the basement and grimaced when the basement door creaked loudly as I opened it. I slid into the basement and left the door slightly ajar. While in the basement, I looked in cupboards. I noticed one cupboard in the corner was chained, and as I walked towards it, I tripped over a floorboard. I stooped and realized that the floorboard could move. Carefully, I placed my fingers under the floorboard and was about to lift it when I heard the floorboard creak behind me. As soon as I spun around, Mr. Nelson punched me in the jaw. I stumbled backwards and crashed into the floor. I blocked my face from Mr. Nelson's attacks until I was able to kick him in the stomach and get away. You killed her! You killed Tegan! I screamed. I tried to dodge around Mr. Nelson as I tried to escape, but he was a large man. He grabbed me by my shirt and dragged me up the stairs like a sack of potatoes. As I struggled against him, he got rope from below the kitchen sink, tied me up, and called the police. Sirens blared about 5 minutes later, and Mr. Nelson opened the door for them to come inside.
I found this boy snooping in my basement and I'd like to press charges.
Mr. Nelson smirked. He killed Tegan. Tell them how you hid her below the floorboards in the basement, I yelled. By this time, Josiah and Monique were awake and peeped from the doorway of their bedroom. One of the officers turned to Mr. Nelson.
Sir, would you like to tell us what this young man is babbling about?
Mr. Nelson looked at me. A wave of uneasiness washed over his face. I smiled.
Sir, we would like to see that basement.
The officer looked from me to Mr. Nelson. Untie me and I'll show you where it is. The senior officer instructed an officer to untie me. Mr. Nelson stepped towards me and the senior officer stood in front of him and placed his hand on his chest. Mr. Nelson stepped back.
Okay, son,
the senior officer said as I stood up.
Show us where the body is.
Gladly. I glared at Mr. Nelson and pushed past him and went to the basement. With the help of the officers, we removed some of the floorboards. What we saw next changed my life forever. Below the floorboards were beer bottles. The officers looked at me puzzled. Mr. Nelson spoke up.
After Tegan was kidnapped, I promised Monique and Josiah I would stop drinking. I hid these down here so the kids wouldn't see it. But sometimes it's so hard after losing my wife, now Tegan.
Mr. Nelson's voice crumbled to the end of his sentence. He walked back to the living room, followed by the officers and me. Needless to say, Mr. Nelson pressed charges for breaking and entering, and I was given a 1-year sentence with hard labor. Every day that I spent behind those prison walls, I thought about Tegan. I regretted the decision I made and wished I could change it. Living with that kind of regret took a toll on me mentally, physically, and emotionally, which caused me to lose a lot of weight in prison. My parents came to visit me as often as possible, and honestly, if it wasn't for them, I don't think I would have made it out alive. About 6 months into my sentencing, I was out on parole and was warned to stay away from Tegan's house. A few days after my release, while watching television with my parents, we heard sirens outside. Then, someone banged on the door. Mom and Dad exchanged looks before Dad opened the front door.
Good evening, sir. Is James at home?
The officer that stood outside asked.
What's this about? Is James at home? We'd like to question him. About what?
I walked to the door and folded my arms. Talk to me about what?
Monique and Josiah Nelson have been kidnapped. Do you know anything about it?
Don't answer that.
Dad said.
We have been at home with James for the past 3 days. If you need further information, I will give you the number of our lawyer.
Dad stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Mom came and stood beside me and hugged me. I buried my head in her neck and allowed the tears to flow. I couldn't believe this was happening again. Over the next few days, I spoke with the family lawyer and the police. Dad even gave them home security footage to promise I was home during the time of the kidnapping. I was no longer a suspect, at least for now. One evening while I was home alone, someone knocked on the door. I opened the door, but no one was there. On the floor lay a package, which I picked up and took inside. It didn't have a name, a stamp, or a return address on it. In the box were memories that I had with Tegan, pictures, CDs, ticket stubs, and dried up roses. In the box was a letter written by Tegan, where she explained that the night her family was robbed, after the men left, she snuck away. Her father was unconscious, and she told Monique and Josiah that she would come back for them. She said that she and her siblings were now safe, and she hoped to see me again someday. My eyes filled with tears. After I read the letter, I burned it to protect their secret. I was happy she was free from her father, but I was sad that she didn't tell me about it earlier, even though I understood why she couldn't. I provided a way for her to be free, and now I'm at peace. It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
As soon as I opened the front door, I could hear them arguing. Recently, it was all they seemed to do.
Why do you always have to complain about everything?
Well, if you weren't so lazy, I wouldn't have to complain, would I?
It made me so sad that my parents seem to hate each other. You're probably thinking this is just another story about a miserable family. Well, just wait and see what you find out at the end of this video, because you are not gonna believe it.
Well, if that's what you think about me, maybe I should just move out.
Do you know that's the most sensible thing you have said in a very long time?
So that's what my dad ended up doing. I was upset that my parents were getting a divorce, but I knew it was for the best. They couldn't carry on living together when all they did was fight. When the day came for my dad to leave, my parents told me that I had to decide who I wanted to live with.
You are old enough to make your own decision. You must decide who you want to live with, me or your father.
But how could I make that choice? I loved both of my parents. How could I pick one over the other? So I decided I would just leave it to chance. I can't choose between you two, so I'm gonna flip a coin. If it's tails, I live with Dad. If it's heads, I will live with you, Mom. I spun the coin high up into the air and watched as it spun around and around before finally catching it on the back of my hand. I lifted my hand up and looked at the coin. Tails.
So you will go with your father?
I looked at Mom sadly. I'm gonna miss you, Mom.
Don't be silly. We will see each other all the time. You can still come over and stay with me.
I gave my mom a hug and Dad and I left. At first, it was a bit strange living with just my dad, but before long we settled into our routine and it was all fine. To be honest, it was nice just living in a house with no arguing or fighting. I went to see my mom whenever I could and she seemed a lot happier too. But then one day, things changed. I had just got home from school and was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard my dad come in.
Beth, come here. There's someone I want you to meet.
I went through to the lounge and saw my dad was there with a woman.
This is Riza. She's my girlfriend.
Your what?
My girlfriend, Beth.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What does he want a girlfriend for? I wanted to tell him that he shouldn't have a girlfriend, that it would just ruin everything, but instead I just smiled at her. Hi, pleased to meet you.
And I'm very happy to meet you too, Beth. More than you will ever know.
That's a bit weird.
I'll leave you two to get to know each other. I'll just go and make us a cup of tea.
My dad left the room and I sat down on the sofa, not really knowing what to say.
You are very pretty, Beth.
Oh, thank you. She reached over and started touching my hair. I started getting a bit freaked out, but luckily my dad came back just in time.
So, you two getting along okay?
Brilliantly, aren't we, Beth?
Yeah, I guess so. There was something really strange about Riza. I couldn't put my finger on it, but she was definitely a bit weird. She was paying me far too much attention. It made me feel really uncomfortable. From that day on, Riza spent all of her time at our house, and the weird feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got even more intense. Sometimes I would look up from watching TV or reading a book and catch her staring at me. It really freaked me out. It all came to a head one Saturday evening. Dad and Riza had gone out for dinner and I had decided to have an early night. I was fast asleep in bed when something suddenly woke me. I opened my eyes and I saw Riza standing at my bedroom door just staring at me. I closed my eyes, but when I opened them again, she had disappeared. What is it with that woman? Why does she constantly stare at me? The next morning, when I was alone with my dad, I told him about what had happened the night before. It's just weird, Dad. She was just standing at the doorway staring at me.
Don't be silly, Beth. Riza wouldn't do that. You must have been hallucinating.
Maybe my dad is right. I mean, I suppose it could have just been a dream. I decided to give Riza the benefit of the doubt. I mean, apart from the staring, she seemed nice enough. And my dad really liked her, so she couldn't be all that bad. Could she? It was nearly the end of the term when my dad told me he had a surprise for me.
We are going to go away in the holidays.
Where to?
We are going to Riza's hometown.
Where is it?
A long way from here. It's down south. It's a remote town in the middle of nowhere. It's going to be a fantastic adventure.
Even though I would have preferred to be going on holiday just with my dad, I couldn't help but get excited at the thought of traveling somewhere far away. I can't wait. I bet it'll be amazing there.
I think you might be right.
When the morning of our holiday arrived, the three of us packed up the car and set off on the long drive south. As we drove, the cities turned into towns and then to remote villages. Are we nearly there?
Not much further.
The roads started getting narrower and narrower until eventually they just became tracks through the grass.
We're here.
I looked out the car window. This looks more like a jungle than a remote town. We got out of the car.
Follow me.
I looked at my dad. Was it just me that thought Riza was sounding really weird and acting strangely? It was like she was a different person. But my dad didn't seem to notice. He just walked after Riza, beckoning me to follow them. We walked through the jungle and came out onto a clearing. There was a group of people standing there as though they were a welcoming party. I was expecting them to crowd around us and say hello, but instead one of them shouted,
Grab her!
The next thing I knew, I was surrounded by them, and they were dragging me away from my dad and Riza. What are you doing? Stop it! But they didn't listen to me. They pushed me into some kind of cage and locked the door.
Leave her alone! Riza, why are they locking Beth up?
Because she is special.
I saw the look of confusion on my dad's face.
Well, I know she is special to me, but why do they think she is special?
Because she has the rarest body in the world.
I wondered what on earth she was talking about. My body was just like anyone else's body. Definitely nothing special.
What do you mean?
Her mother was from the jungle as well, and you have the blood of the ancient ancestors from this jungle too. back together, you made the only child in the world to have this DNA.
But what are you going to do with her?
We are going to sacrifice her to the gods.
Panic started rising up inside me, and I thought I was gonna pass out. I could see the worried look on my dad's face when he heard what Riza was planning.
You have to release her. Set her free right now.
I'm sorry. We are not going to do that. She is too important to us.
But she is just a schoolgirl.
To you, maybe. But to us, she is the most important girl in the world.
Please, don't hurt me. I'll do anything you want. Please, don't sacrifice me.
I'm sorry. We don't have any choice.
Dad? Help me! Help me! My dad took one look at my panic-stricken face and ran towards the cage. He started pulling at the door, trying to break it open, but it was no use. Within seconds, he was surrounded by the villagers. They unlocked the door and threw him inside the cage with me. I ran over to him. Are you okay, Dad?
I'm fine.
The two of us sat huddled together watching and wondering what was about to happen next. Riza came over and stood outside the cage.
Don't try to escape because you won't get anywhere. I will see you in the morning.
With that, she turned around and walked off with the group of people. Oh, Dad, what are we gonna do?
Don't worry, Beth. I won't let anything happen to you.
But you heard what she said. There's no way for us to escape from here.
We will find a way. Don't worry.
The two of us sat there in the darkness. I was terrified. And suddenly, I heard a noise. Did you hear that? What was it?
I don't know. It came from that direction.
I looked to where my dad was pointing. It was pitch black, but I thought I could make out a shadow in the darkness. Who is it? Shh. Mom? I couldn't believe it. My mom was standing on the other side of the cage. What are you doing here? How did you know where to find us?
One of my close friends here in the jungle told me that my daughter and my ex-husband were here in the jungle. I just had a feeling that Riza was up to no good. I got here as soon as I could.
They said I have some rare body. They want to sacrifice me to the gods.
You have to get us out of here.
Okay, just stay quiet. I will look for something to break the lock.
Dad and I sat there in silence. It seemed like an eternity, but then my mom reappeared.
Stand back. I'm going to smash the lock with this stone.
Dad and I moved to the back of the cage, and I watched as my mom lifted the huge stone up into the air and brought it crashing down onto the lock. The lock smashed into pieces, and Mom quickly opened the door.
Come on. We don't have much time. We have to get out of here.
My dad pushed me out of the door, and I followed my mom through the jungle. I could hear shots from behind us.
Hurry. They know we have escaped.
We picked up the pace and raced through the jungle, but just as we were about to reach my dad's car, someone stepped out of the shadows.
Riza!
Stop! You can't leave. We need her.
You're crazy, Riza. You can't sacrifice my daughter.
I can and I will.
Is that the only reason you wanted to be my girlfriend? So that you could get close to Beth?
I admit that was the reason at first, but then I started to fall in love with you.
Well, if you love me, then let Beth go.
Riza looked like she was considering it, but then she just laughed.
You don't think I would put you before the gods, do you? You're the crazy one.
My dad looked at my mom and me and then reached inside his pocket. He threw his car keys to my mom.
Go! Take my car and get Beth out of here!
But what about you, Dad?
Don't worry about me. I will stay behind to block Riza and her people.
I stood there hesitating.
Go on, there's no time to lose.
Your dad is right, Beth. We have to get you out of here.
I love you, Dad.
I love you too.
Mom and I ran ahead and jumped into Dad's car. She started the engine and drove off just in time. As we drove away, I could see through the rear window the villagers running after the car. I can't believe Dad sacrificed himself to save us.
Your dad is a good man, Beth.
I looked at my mom, but I thought you hated him.
No, Beth, I don't hate him. Actually, I still love him, but we just couldn't live together.
Do you think he'll be okay?
Don't worry. As soon as we get to the next town, I'm going to stop and call the police. They will find him.
Mom did exactly what she said.